But we're going to begin this morning with the global health crisis, the spread of the coronavirus in the United States and throughout the world. The virus has now claimed the life of its first known American, a man in his 50s in Washington state. And more than 50 people in a long-term nursing facility there are experiencing symptoms of the virus and are being tested after 2 other people at that facility tested positive. The instinct of President Trump has clearly been to downplay concerns. He said this week that the number of cases have been, quote, going very substantially down, not up, unquote. But health experts say we should expect more cases. And there are serious questions being raised about how prepared the U.S. and the Trump administration are for this crisis. There is a dearth of viable testing kits, for example. I spoke with the man leading the coronavirus response, Vice President Mike Pence, about the likely spread of the disease. Vice President Pence, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jake.
So the American people really want to hear from the Trump administration about what's happening with the coronavirus. Let me start with the very sad news about the man in Washington state who died. He appeared to have contracted the virus through what's called community spread, meaning not because of travel and not because he had contact with a known quarantined patient. The president said that there are 4 other patients very sick. Are we expecting, should the public brace themselves for more Americans to die from this?
Well, first off, we extend our deepest sympathies to the family of the man who passed away this weekend. And our prayers are certainly with the patients that are seriously ill. The good news is, of the 22 Americans that have contracted the coronavirus, more than half of them are almost fully recovered. And I think it's all a reflection of the fact that early on in this crisis, in January, the president took the unprecedented step of suspending all travel from China and establishing a quarantining effect. As you know, in addition to those 22 Americans, we've had 46 other Americans that have been through quarantine that have contracted the virus, but they're all being treated and they're all doing well. But the president took that action and established the quarantines out of an abundance of caution. Mm-hmm. I was literally there in the Oval Office the day the health team came in, said to the president, no president's ever done this before, but given what was happening in China, they recommended that he take that action, and the president said, do it. And as Dr. Fauci has said, and others have said, the risk for the average American to coronavirus remains low, and that is largely owing to the decision the president made, the energetic efforts of CDC and local health officials, and we'll continue to lean in that in a hopeful way. Now, we know there will be more cases.
And possibly more deaths?
And you know, it is possible. I mean, the reality that Dr. Fauci and others explained to me since I took on these duties a few days ago is that for most people that contract the coronavirus, they will recover. They will deal with a respiratory illness. We'll get them treatment. But for people that have other conditions mm-hmm. That would militate toward a worse outcome, that we could have more. We could have more sad news. But the American people should know the risk for the average American remains low, mm-hmm. And they can be confident. And after 3 days leading the president's effort on the coronavirus, I'm more confident than ever that we are bringing a whole of government approach. The president has directed the full resources of the federal government and talking with governors around the country, particularly in states where we've brought people back home.
California, China, Washington, Oregon.
I've spoken to Governor Cuomo in New York, mm-hmm. Governor Newsom in California. One governor after another has praised the efforts of HHS, CDC, but now it's incumbent on us to continue that effort. We're going to work with members in both parties in Congress to resource our federal agencies and, just as important, to resource state and local health officials as they engage in the kind of preventative measures and treatment that will mitigate the spread of the coronavirus.
As you know, the community spread is one of the most concerning because people who contracted it in China, that's one thing. Obviously, we don't wish it upon anybody, but at least there's an understanding of where it came from. Same thing with a doctor who might get it from a patient. Mm-hmm. There are other people who have community spread coronavirus. What is being done to figure out how they contracted this virus?
The way that it works, Jake, is that local health officials are in the lead, but in the cases this weekend and this week that emerged as as you said, a community infection, we send CDC officials in to work very closely to identify where they potentially were exposed to the coronavirus. And that aggressive effort is underway.
Who heads that? CDC, HHS?
Actually, our local officials, local health officials, state health officials are the front line of defense, but we move CDC personnel in immediately. They consult with them because the objective is we get that patient treated, but we want to find out not just where they got it, but we want to find out who else may have been exposed so those people can receive the kind of treatment and have the kind of recovery that most Americans will have that even contract this disease.
What do you say to people who heard you and the president Saturday talk about the woman who died, and then it comes out later that the CDC had erroneously told you it was a woman, but actually it was a man who had died of this? What do you say to people who say that this doesn't fill them with confidence about the federal-state coordination?
Yeah, it was, the CDC had briefed us speaking to officials in Washington State, and it was just a miscommunication. It doesn't lessen the tragedy at all. And again, our hearts go out to that man's family and his friends in that community. But I have to tell you, Jake, I mean, the president tapped me to lead this coronavirus response, building on the great work our White House task force had been doing. We've added additional personnel. I've got one of the leading experts in infectious diseases who's going to be my right arm at the White House, joining me tomorrow morning in the West Wing. But if people had seen what I've seen, I think they can be very proud of the work CDC is doing, HHS is doing, and just as important, the work that our governors and our state governments and local health officials are doing.
Let me ask you, because one area that there's definite need for improvement is the testing kits and the number of testing kits that are out there. The South Koreans have been able to test more than 90,000 of their citizens for their coronavirus. The U.S. has had trouble manufacturing the kits. The CDC has struggled a bit and distributing them to local labs. The latest numbers show only maybe around 500 people in the U.S. have been tested. Why are we so behind other developed countries on this? And when will there be more of these testing kits delivered to the frontline healthcare providers?
It's a very fair question, and it was one of the first issues that governors I spoke to raised with me. I'm happy to report that this weekend, more than 15,000 testing kits have been released. Also, the FDA has approved a testing regimen that state and local officials can be using. And beyond that, we actually are working with a commercial provider with the new testing framework to send another 50,000 kits out. So we're addressing it, we're leaning into it, and more importantly, we've established a process in a number of cities across the country where if someone presents at the local hospital with a respiratory ailment, we want them also tested for coronavirus. And so that's why we're going to move a lot of volume of testing kits.
Is there a goal?
FDA
like 20,000 more by the end of next week? I mean, what is the goal here?
Well, I was informed by our team just in the last 48 hours that we're going to see 15,000 kits are in the mail. They're rolling out. We've approved a process for local testing. We think we've addressed the issue. But again, I want to emphasize the American people. What I've seen and what I've heard from these extraordinary personnel at HHS and CDC, in like Dr. Fauci's case, someone who literally has been there through multiple administrations, is we're ready. We're ready. And this is an all-hands-on-deck effort. And whether it be testing kits or whether it be medical devices or protective gear for our healthcare providers. You know, one of the things the president made clear, Jake, was our first priority is patients that have contracted the coronavirus. Immediately after that is any healthcare providers, any doctors and nurses and people that are going to be coming alongside people that have contracted this disease. And so we literally just entered into a contract with 3M. They'll be producing another 35 million masks a month, starting immediately. We have about 43 million masks stockpiled today. I want to say to your viewers, though, it is not necessary for Americans to go out and buy masks.
Right, it's not going to do anything for you. It's the people who have coronavirus that have the masks, need the masks,
and it's
right?
and then the
healthcare providers.
It's our healthcare providers.
Right.
We want to make sure, and the president's made this clear to me, we want to make sure that the people that are treating people that have contracted the coronavirus have the protective gear, the masks, and the gloves, and we're working very energetically to accomplish that.
So I do want to ask you a political question about this, even though I see it primarily as a health issue. There's been a lot of unfortunate rhetoric on the left and on the right about the coronavirus. I want you to take a listen to something that the president's son, Don Jr., said about Democrats and the coronavirus just on Friday.
Anything that they can use to try to hurt Trump, they will. But for them to try to take a pandemic and seemingly hope that it comes here and kills millions of people so that they could end Donald Trump's streak of winning is a new level of sickness.
Can we agree that neither Democrats nor Republicans want Americans to get the coronavirus and die from it? I mean, that does seem like it seems like very extreme rhetoric. I don't expect you to criticize the president's son, but you don't think that Democrats want people to contract this disease, do you?
Well, I think what the president said earlier this week, and his charge to me, is to remind the American people that the risk is low, to assure the American people that we're ready, but also to say, as the president said, this is no time for politics. And frankly, I think that was Don Jr.'s point, that there has been some very strong rhetoric directed at the president by some members of Congress and
you don't think that was strong rhetoric?
Well,
he said seemingly Democrats want millions of Americans to die of coronavirus.
But responding to the kind of things that have been hurled is understandable. But what the president's charged us to do, in my conversations with Speaker Pelosi, with Senator Schumer, my conversations with Republican and Democrat governors, is to set the politics aside on this and to work the problem. And I want to assure you, viewers, that's exactly what we're doing. And with the exception of some barbs being thrown by some of the predictable voices in the public debate on the left, the usual shots the president will take,
I've heard some from the right also, with respect, sir. I've heard some, not from you, but I've heard some from the right.
Well, look, what I'm telling you is that this is really a time for us to come together. Because remember, we're talking about the health and lives of the American people. You know, I spoke on the phone last night to Jerry Goldman. She is the wife of Carl Goldman. And I caught her on a great night because she'd just gotten a blood test back. She'd been in quarantine for several weeks. She got a clean bill of health. She's going home, back to their small business. And she told me Carl's doing great, but he's still got a ways to go before they allow him to go on home and be back in his community. I mean, we're talking about real Americans dealing with the coronavirus. And I think it really is a time. It really is a time for us to look for ways to come together. And I have to tell you, Jake, the conversations that I'm having with leaders in the Congress, the conversations I'm having with, frankly, Democrat and Republican governors around the country, gives me great hope that as we move forward, and in the wake of the tragic news of this weekend of the loss of an American life, I continue to believe that we have an opportunity to come together to make sure all of our agencies have the resources that they need, all of our states have the resources that they need, and with the proper expertise, the proper resources, and the prayers of millions of Americans, we're going to get through this.
One last question, sir, and it's on the same topic of American lives and prayers, and that has to do with the peace deal or whatever you want to call it that's going on in Afghanistan right now. And the U.S. just signed this agreement with the Taliban Saturday. It's a formal step aimed at ending the war in the long term, withdrawing U.S. service members. I have to say, I am surprised that the deal does not require the Taliban to renounce al-Qaeda. It does say that they can't give any aid or assistance in any way to al-Qaeda, but it doesn't demand that they renounce them. And, you know, to be frank, this idea that they're not going to aid al-Qaeda is a lie that the Taliban has told for many, many years. And as you know, because it was a joint U.S.-Afghan operation just last September, the head of al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, Asim Umar was killed in Helmand province just last September by our brave soldiers. Shouldn't the Taliban agree to renounce al-Qaeda before the U.S. withdraws service members?
The agreement signed today represents a historic step forward on the path to peace. And we remain hopeful that it will hold. Now, that being said, the president said if the Taliban continues to keep their word, and we just went through 7 days where we saw a dramatic reduction of violence against American forces in Afghanistan and innocent civilians. If that continues to hold, the president's made it clear that we're going to be able to reduce forces in the region. But I wouldn't gainsay what the Taliban has literally signed and put in writing. It is the first time ever that they have been willing to commit publicly to oppose the presence of al-Qaeda in their region. First time they've ever spoken out against terrorist elements. And 19 years ago, and thousands of American lives and injuries of our extraordinary soldiers since, we all remember that it was al-Qaeda and terrorist elements that we've still been fighting to this day in Afghanistan that brought us there to the first place. The attack of 9/11 originated from Afghanistan, and it was why we launched U.S. forces to begin with. But in talking to Zal Khalilzad and talking to Secretary of State Pompeo, the president and I have a sense that for the first time, there's an opportunity for peace. That President Ghani and the Afghanistan government signed the agreement today. The Taliban signed the agreement. They've made a commitment to oppose the presence of terrorist elements and terrorist organizations using Afghanistan to launch attacks around the world, including against us. But now the hard work begins, and it's going to be incumbent on both parties to work together to form an Afghanistan government. And in the meantime, we're going to monitor it closely, and we are going to continue to hope that 19 years since the initiation of hostilities in Operation Enduring Freedom, and thousands of American lives lost, and injuries, that we will find our way toward a peaceful political resolution in Afghanistan and be able to bring our troops home.
All right. The hard work begins. Good luck with that work, and also, of course, with the coronavirus task force. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Jay. Good to see you.